And I think I started writing this book in order to figure out what it means to feel at home on a place on earth. And I think it's, you always have to build a home, don't you? Your home is something you actively build around you, whether it's a house or whether it's a connection to a place. You have to build it by spending time in it, by experiencing the seasons. In Finland, seasons are very varied and very different. So there's a huge difference between winter, between spring, summer, autumn. We're very seasonal people. So you have to sort of experience all the different seasons and see how they affect the landscape and stuff in order to, I think, really put down roots somewhere.
Merhabalar, bugün Kitaplar ve Diğer Şeyler'de Miras Toprak'ın yazarı Maria Turtschaninoff'la birlikteyiz. Hoş geldin Maria. So, welcome Maria.
Thank you.
I'd like to begin with the writing process of the novel. How was this story first born within you? Was it an image, a feeling, a sentence? And I'd like to ask how the idea for such a comprehensive and long-spanning narrative come to you.
It came to me from a very personal place, and I would say maybe a feeling, first of all. A feeling and then a question. What happened was that when I was 40, I lost the last two older relatives I had, my mother and my grandmother. And suddenly I became very aware of the fact that I was the oldest in my family tree, and that it was becoming my responsibility to carry the lives and the stories of all these relatives that have come before me forward to the next generations. And that felt like a pretty big responsibility. And I also inherited a small cabin that my mother had built 10 years before she died up in the region in Finland called Ostrobotnia, where she was from. But in the small village where my mother had never lived, she was a city girl, but it was the village my grandfather was from, her father. So she had built a house there on land she had inherited from her father, and she loved spending time there. And I never quite really understood why she loved it so much. Because, she wasn't from there. It wasn't really her childhood. And it definitely wasn't mine. I hadn't spent very much time there at all as a child, because I always visited my grandparents in the city that was close by. And then I inherited this cabin when she passed away. And I was a bit baffled what I was going to do with this cabin, because it's in the middle of the woods, far away from everything. The road ends. It's not by a lake. Finns love their summer cabins and cottages, but they're often by a lake or by the sea. This one is in the middle of the forest. And I thought, what am I going to do with this house? And then when I started spending time there without my mother, something happened to me. And that was that I got a very, very strong feeling of coming home. And I couldn't understand this feeling because I have never lived there. She hasn't lived there. But it is land on which my ancestors have lived for many hundreds of years. And I think I started writing this book in order to figure out what it means to feel at home on a place on earth, to belong to a place. So it started from this very, very personal emotion. But then it expanded and grew, and I wanted to explore themes of belonging to a place on earth in general. What is the relationship like between people and place, between humans and nature and the earth? What does it look like? How has it changed over time, and why? So then the themes expanded very much and became quite broad and big. But originally it was from this very personal place in me.
From this answer, I understand that you see literature as a method of mapping out what's happening inside us And would you say it's also a method of healing ourselves psychologically, or would you say that this healing happens automatically when we explore ourselves?
I don't know if it. I mean, literature is very powerful. I don't know if you could say, sort of, as a blanket statement, that it will always lead to healing, but I think it will always lead to greater understanding of ourselves, hopefully, of other people, hopefully as well. It's a great tool for empathy, and hopefully that empathy can also be turned towards ourselves.
I'd like to ask you a personal question in this moment. What was the book that affected you the most by means of empathy and understanding?
That is a huge question. I don't know if I can sort of pinpoint one single book. I think all the books we read, especially growing up, really shape us into the people we are. And I can sort of feel all these books I read, especially when I was young, I think, in my DNA. They've gone into who I am, and I think it's hard to separate who I would be without them. I think any book that talks about a life that is different from yours really adds to this sort of sense of empathy and understanding other people who have different lives. I think it's one of the reasons I now, as an adult, I love reading biographies and stories of people who come from very different places on earth than me, and from very different cultures and backgrounds, and sort of trying to see what is the common denominator, what is it that makes us all human.
Are you surprised that this novel has resonated in so many countries? And in which emotion do you think readers connected the most?
I have been very surprised, I have to say quite honestly, because before this novel, I wrote a series of fantasy novels for young readers, and they did very well internationally. And at the time, I thought that it's because fantasy can be a lingua franca, a language that is understood regardless of what culture or country you're from. That because we remove, or in high fantasy that takes place in a completely fictitious world, we remove our world from the equation. We remove our countries, our religions, our cultures. And maybe it becomes sort of this universal language that everyone can understand and speak. So I thought, okay, now I've written this book, which is a story set in a small village in rural Finland. It spans 400 years, and it's very much about the Nordic, the Finnish and the Nordic relationship between humans and nature, and humans and the forest. This book will not do so well internationally. I was certain of it. Maybe the other Nordic countries will be interested, maybe, but I had very sort of low expectations. And then the first country my agent sold the novel to was Azerbaijan, and it's sold to some countries that have very much surprised me. And then after a while, I realized that it's maybe not so surprising at all, because we all come from somewhere. We all have some kind of relationship to place, to nature, to the earth. It probably looks different in different countries, but that sort of feeling of having roots and maybe having been removed from those roots or missing them, these are all very, very universal experiences. And I think at one point I was also very worried that this book was, in a sense, because it came from such a personal place in me, I was worried that it was going to be too personal, that the themes weren't going to be universal enough. But then again, that old cliche of the local is global and the personal is universal, I think really actually is true.
I believe so as well, yeah. And I'd like to ask if we can see this book as a book that tells the narrative of the history of human consciousness that spans over 400 years. Would you say that it depicts the human psyche in that terms?
Yeah, I'm sure you can see that as well. Since I write about very many different people, we get the insight into very many different psyches, and to some extent what has shaped them and why they are like they are. But that wasn't really maybe my main aim. What I see is that in the novel, the main character is the land and the place, and that the people are like dragonflies. They are here one day and they're gone the next, within the perspective of the earth that has such an ancient and extremely long perspective. So maybe in a sense there are many threads interwoven into the story, into the themes, but I was mostly interested in exploring what the relationship between the people and the place looked like, and what has shaped them, why it looked like it did in the 1600s, in the 1700s, and so forth, and why it changed over time.
Thank you for the answer. So, continuing from this issue, throughout the novel, the soil almost feels like a character in its own. And I'd like to ask, what does the earth, nature, represent to you? And do you believe that the land we live in truly remembers us? Do you think the memory of the land, of the nature, is real?
I do. At least I really want to believe that. I want to believe that it is not a one-way relationship. That is not just we who experience nature, who take from nature, who enjoy nature. Because we are nature. And that's something we often forget. We see us as very separate from. There's nature and there's humans, humanity, civilization. And we really don't want to think about the fact that we are animals and we are part of nature. And nature is made up of everything that is in nature, and we are one of those parts. And I think that is an important thing to remember, and a comforting part. It gives you context, it gives you somewhere to belong, it gives you a family, that we are part of the same ecosystem. And I hope, I got that feeling. That's the feeling I got when I came to this place on earth. I did get a very strong feeling that this land, this piece of land remembers me and knows who I am because it knows and has known my ancestors.
In the book, there are elements such as the spirit of the swamp, the forest folk, and the unseen beings. Do you see those as metaphors or just products of imagination?
Well, they're a little bit of everything, but mostly for me, they were tools for exploring how the people of a certain time viewed their surroundings. Because for so long, we didn't have an explanation for many of the things that happened to us. Why was there a famine? Why was there a drought? Why were there, illnesses that came? Why was there a storm that ruined the crop? And so humans and people looked for explanations in mythology, in folklore, to try and make some kind of sense of the world before there was a scientific explanation for many of these things. And I really wanted to sort of be as close to the people of the time as possible. And thus I used these ways of looking at the world and looking at nature that they would have used. And they understood these phenomena through mythical creatures, through folklore, through stories. But of course, they are also in many ways symbols and analogies for how we how we view nature, how we exploit nature, how we take what we think is rightfully ours, and so forth.
Thank you. So, for a place to become home, are memories enough, or must one struggle with the land itself? Must one deal with the land itself directly?
Yes, I think one does. I mean, not necessarily, you don't have to farm the land to understand it, but you have to be in it and spend time with it in order for a place to become truly home. And I think it's important to talk about this because, not everyone has access to a place on Earth that their ancestors have been on for hundreds of years. Many people have been displaced, and I have other, branches of my family tree where I don't know where they were from. And I think it's, you always have to build a home, don't you? Your home is something you actively build around you, whether it's a house or whether it's a connection to a place. You have to build it by spending time in it, by experiencing the seasons. In Finland, seasons are very varied and very different. So there's a huge difference between winter, between spring, summer, autumn. We're very seasonal people. So you have to sort of experience all the different seasons and see how they affect the landscape and stuff in order to, I think, really put down roots somewhere. And then personally, I think it helps if you grow something you can eat, maybe in a little pot or something, but, to really sort of connect with the land.
At the end of the novel, there is a decision to place the forest under protection. Is giving up on taming the land a defeat or a great liberation, on the contrary?
Well, there's the sort of option. The question is posed: well, shall we protect the land instead of trying to exploit it for economic benefits? I think it would be a great liberation and a great healing of being able to see the land as not something to just merely try and get money from, but instead to see that it has other values, that it has a value in itself, just from being as it is. And I recently got one of these, because I own some land, I get this forestry magazine, and the big headline on the front page was like, "You must care for the forest." And I thought, must you? Really? I think the forest does just fine without us, but it also cares for us. And that's the aspect we often forget. So yes, I think it would be a liberation to think that, you don't have to just try and get as much money as you can from something, and that the relationship can look completely different.
Maybe we need to protect the forest from ourselves. Maybe that's the sign.
To some extent, but again, without forgetting that we are part of it. There's also this sort of opposite view almost. We have this view of we must care for the forest, we must exploit it. It's not healthy if we don't farm it, like farmland. But there's also this other extreme, which sort of sees humans as only a negative influence on nature, that we only ever harm nature and hurt it. And that's also not true. And that's also very reductive. And I think we need to find something in between.
The tension between carrying on an inheritance and carving out one's own path is very strong in the novel. Is a person bound to live with their roots, or can they free themselves from those roots?
I think you can. I think many people do. Some people need to in order to live their lives fully, because, there's so much you can put into the word roots. I guess it depends on really how you define that. But yet I think we are still always to some extent defined by where we come from and how we grew up. And I think the roots are more important to some people than to others, and that's okay too. I noticed, of course, that as I age, these things have become much more important to me than they were when I was young, and when I still had my older relatives that I could have asked questions and I could have listened more. And now, of course, I regret that I didn't do that. And I find that it's more important the older I get, and my relatives and my ancestors and all these things become more important. And at the same time, yes, there's that aspect that we talked about before of it being a little bit of a burden. You are some kind of keeper of these stories of the people who have gone before you, and how do you keep them, and how do you carry them forward?
In the book, the letters between Alina and Charlotte feel like a window opening to the outside world. In today's digital age, do you think if it's still possible for two people to open up their souls to each other so deeply?
Oh, I miss the time of writing proper letters. I still did it when I was young, and it's something I really lament that we have lost, because I think maybe there are still some people who do it a little bit, but it's definitely going away. And the slowness of you can write emails, but the slowness of the process, the time it took, seeing someone's handwriting, maybe being able to see what mood they were in when they were writing from the handwriting. I think, I'm a nostalgic, so I miss these things, but I do think that it is absolutely possible for two people to do the same thing online. You can communicate like this over video, which of course gives another dimension. And I do think, we see a lot of stories of people finding soulmates, for instance, on different continents through the internet. So I do believe it's possible. It's just maybe taken a different shape, but I still miss the time of writing letters.
So once again, the form changes, but some things stay the same, maybe.
Yeah, exactly. And it was fun that you said that, or interesting that you said that the world opens up, because that chapter is set exactly at the time when it did start opening up for the individual in Finland, where, the end of the 19th century. End of the 19th century is the time where individualism starts sort of rising up. And the people in Finland, especially, who were very, very rural, and you were born to a life and there was really not a lot of ways to change it. You continued and did the same thing your parents did, pretty much. And were very much stuck. But at that time, education started becoming an option. You could start changing the trajectory of your life and becoming someone different than your parents.
And would you say that this age of individualism, modernism, also cuts up our roots with our culture that you emphasize so much?
Yes. Definitely later on, not quite yet at that time, but later on is also the time that Finland finally became urbanized, and a lot of people moved from the rural areas to urban areas, and lost a lot of the community that you have when you live in the place where you grew up, that I know a lot of people who are from small places also find incredibly restricting. Mm-hmm. So there's a gain and a loss at the same time, as there are with many things. You can realize who you are, you can become someone else, but it also puts a lot of onus and responsibility on the individual, that so you have to make all these choices. that you didn't have to do in the past.
When a reader steps through the gates of Nevaback'a and finishes the book, what feeling from this land would you like them to carry with them when they finish?
I would really like them to carry with them out into the world a feeling of love. And that was the leading light for me when I wrote the book, that I wanted to convey a feeling of love between generations, but between humans and nature as well. I touched on it before, but that it's not a one-way street, that it's a mutual relationship between us and nature. And I've often quoted, when I've talked about this book, one of the writers that influenced me the most as I was doing research for it is an American biologist called Robin Wall Kimmerer, who has Native American heritage and who teaches biology. And she mentions in one of her books how she asked new students how many of them started studying biology because they love nature, and all of them put up their hands. And then she asked, how many of you think that nature loves you back? And no one put up their hand. And she said in the book that goes against everything that her culture, her Native American culture, has taught her, that it is a two-way relationship. It's not just that we love nature or we hurt nature, but that there's also reciprocity. And that it's much more difficult to harm someone who you think loves you. And there are many good books about where we're heading as humans with nature, with the earth, that are dystopian. This is what's going to happen if we don't change our ways, if we don't, change how we're treating nature. And personally, I don't know how much you can change a person's heart by scaring them. Can you really make a big difference by just frightening people? Or is the risk that then we just get paralyzed and think, well, there's no point? So what I really wanted to do was to try and remind people of the love that has existed between us and nature, and sort of point out that there is a way to go to find that again, and that could give us a completely different possibility.
That's really beautiful. So you took an idea from another culture and you conveyed it through literature. I think that's really beautiful and universal. And thank you so much, Maria, for all your answers.
Thank you for your great questions.
Thank you. Bugün Kitaplar ve Diğer Şeyler'de Miras Toprağın yazarı Maria Turtschaninoff'u ağırladık. Sonraki videolarımızda görüşmek üzere.